Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Marcus Wagner, he is here. His company's Act 2, that's ACCTWO.com to learn more about it. Neat company, covers several different verticals, helping provide some extremely important financial and accounting information to keep them where they need to be. First of all, let's start off by talking about all those verticals that you help. But specifically, let's then focus on the situation with churches, which is unique. I like to always say there's a business side to everything, including nonprofits, including the churches. But sometimes their needs are different in that business side. So give us the verticals, and then let's talk about churches.
Sure. Thanks for having me today, Kevin. It's good to be here this morning with you. And, overall as a business, what we do is we provide cloud-based accounting software and business process as a service or outsourced finance and accounting to small and medium-sized businesses. And in terms of the verticals that we work with, there are really three major buckets. One is software and technology, everything from the software as a service companies to tech companies. We work with a lot of companies in Austin and California and hot spots like that. We also work with energy and industrial services companies. So that could be the whole oil and gas value chain. Being based here in Houston, obviously, we work with a lot of companies like that. As well as environmental services, industrial services companies. And then the third bucket...
Although you're really glad to be diverse these days.
We are. We're luckily, we're not entirely focused on the oil and gas industry because they're struggling right now, and especially the services companies because their clients are upstream oil and gas companies, and they control the purse strings. And they're basically telling them to cut their costs by 50% if they want to keep the business. So we're seeing some of that. But the third industry bucket that we work in is not-for-profits. And we've got a unique focus in the not-for-profit space around churches and other faith-based organizations.
Okay. Talk a little bit about that. And what percentage of your business is made up of nonprofits and churches?
I think probably about 20% of our business comes from churches.
Interesting. And do you want to grow that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We actually have a dedicated director of not-for-profit services. Her name is Tammy Bunting. She lives in the Dallas area, and she has been and actually continues to be a CFO for churches. And so she's lived in that world for a long time. She really understands some of the unique needs. We probably ought to get her on the program at a later date because she can speak to a lot of this stuff in even more detail than I can.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So what's unique about nonprofits when it comes to their needs?
One of the things that you see, first of all not-for-profits, unless they're the really big guys, every penny counts. And a lot of times they depend on volunteers to do a lot of the different functions to actually run the not-for-profit. And that's very true in the finance and accounting world, where you've got people that are, maybe they're not even accountants. They're trying to do the best they can. They've got a heart for the mission of the not-for-profit or the mission of the church. But a lot of them aren't even getting paid. And so being able to attract and retain the kind of talent that you need is a challenge for churches. And really, the common challenge across all not-for-profits is you've got to be able to slice and dice your books across a number of different, what I'll call, dimensions. And so, for example, a lot of not-for-profits raise money through grants. Well, every grant you get, whether it's the federal government or a state government or any other grant-making authority, they require you to track all of your revenue and all your expenses by that grant. So you've got to be able to slice and dice by grant. But if you've got a church, they've got missions, different ministries. You might have, youth ministry, and you might have elder care, and, all of these other different ministries. And so, again, those ministries have budgets, and they've got expenses, and the church needs to be able to track things across those different ministries. So slicing and dicing is one of the key requirements that they have. And unfortunately, what you see is they all use QuickBooks and they're using Excel, and they're manually creating all these reports, which takes a ton of time.
Yeah, and so they're trying to do manually what your system intuitively does.
Right.
And so their labor costs would be dropped considerably just from that aspect alone.
Absolutely. And the ability to close their books and produce those reports for the senior pastor or the executive pastor who wants to see how they're doing.
Elders, or the board of directors, depending on the nonprofit entity.
Right.
So extremely important. And you do this in a more cost-effective way. How do you do that?
Well, one of the ways we do it is through the technology, the Intact accounting system that is really the foundation from a technology perspective of our business. has what are called dimensions. And in fact, out of the box, it comes with 8 dimensions, and then you can add as many unlimited dimensions on top of that you want. And that's slicing and dicing by donor, or by member of the church, or by grant, or by ministry, or by mission, or by department. You start thinking about all the different ways that you'd want to slice and dice. So that's one of the ways that we do that is setting it up so that you can literally push a button and slice it that way. The other thing that's very important is just fundamental automation of as many of the processes as you can automate. Because when you have a lot of manual things happening, it just takes longer to wrangle all that stuff together into a report. And what's interesting about churches, Kevin, is unlike what you might think, right, which is that a for-profit business has a need for fast reporting, but a church maybe can take its time. It's the other way around. Churches are driven on a weekly schedule. Mm-hmm. And you think about why that is, right? They have their Sunday worship service, and Sunday morning is when they pull in most of the funding that they get. And so early that following week is when the executive pastors are sitting down and looking at their dashboard and saying, what was our attendance this week, potentially versus budget or target? What was the average giving by member? And in total, how much cash did we actually bring in this week?
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I remember, and I don't know when I stopped remembering this, but I remember when I would go to church, particularly to smaller churches, right? They'd have a sign, with a list of the hymns that were going to be that day, how many people attended last week's service, and how much money they brought in last week.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and they may not be as ostentatious about putting that out in front of...
Actually, I think it was, in their cases, because they were so small, was transparency.
Yeah.
Say, hey, this is what we do with... We got $24,000 last week, and we have 3 employees.
Absolutely.
Do the math here.
Well, and I go to a Methodist church, and one of the things we Methodists are really into is statistics.
Yeah.
And it's not just financial information. It's not just dollars. It's how many visitors did we have this week versus members? Because that's important if you're trying to grow the church. What are the maybe it's by zip code, or maybe it's by demographic, age groups, and things like that. Those are things that executive pastors really care about now, because they're trying to reach out to the unchurched. They're trying to reach out to maybe a different demographic. Some churches maybe have an aging membership, and so they're very concerned about bringing younger members into the mix so that they can keep it fresh and reach out to those people who need the church. And a lot of that just points back to finance and accounting, because people say, well, show me the numbers, whether that's dollars or whether it's visitors or whatever. And so you need to be able to have a church accounting department that can actually keep track of that.
Yeah, Marcus Wagner talking about some very important stuff when it comes to the church and to nonprofits in general. And I'm assuming that the priorities for the nonprofits are similar to the churches.
Very similar. Yeah, very similar. They a lot of times it's just terminology. The dimensions are called different things. It could be grants or funds. They may be tracking more volunteer hours. But at the end of the day, it's all about, the metrics about their outcomes. Not-for-profits talk about inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And the outcome measures are really what matter, whether it's, how many members is the church serving, how much are we pouring into the different missions that we care about as a church, and what are the outcomes of that?
Mm-hmm. Act 2, ACCTTWO.com. Final thoughts before I let you go?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting about churches, Kevin, is that churches can be very small and they can be very large. We actually work with a church that has a budget of over $100 million. And that church has more CPAs on staff than a lot of our for-profit clients. And so they have very sophisticated needs. And what I see that's very interesting now is technology providers are coming out of the woodwork, catering specifically to churches and other not-for-profits. I'll give you one example before we close. Online giving. In the old days, you pass the basket around and you put, $20 or however much you want to give in the basket. Today, people are giving online. They're giving using their mobile device. And we work with a number of different payment technology providers that have some very cool ways of reaching out and engaging with your donors and your members to raise funding. And that's just one example of the emerging technologies that I'm seeing around churches and not-for-profits that are very cool.
Yeah, I like the churches that have the ATM machine in the lobby. If you feel particularly moved today, brethren, we got that ATM right there ready for you.
That's pretty subtle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's real subtle, like a freight train. All right. I always enjoy seeing you, Marcus Wagner.
Good to be here, Kevin. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Look forward to it, too. ActACCT2.com. I'm Kevin Price. This is The Price of Business. More for you right after this.